Akedil Toishanuly is a scientist-folklorist, candidate of philological sciences. He studies the Turkic-Mongolian folklore, mythology, omens, and the ideas of ancient rituals. He wrote a number of works as Turkic-Mongolian mythology, history of Kazakh folklore, Folklore and Independence, Folklore of Kazakhs abroad. He's the author of many reports and a participant in numerous scientific conferences in Mongolia, Russia and China. Mythology is one of the topics you are researching. What role do ancient myths play in our spiritual life?
Алатын орны өте үлкен. Өйткені миф дегеніміз, мифология дегеніміз халқымыздың рухани байлығының, мәдени мәйегінің, өнерінің, әдебиетінің.
They are of great importance. Mythology is the basis of the spiritual wealth of our people, the root of our culture, literature and their golden support. For example, take our coat of arms and flag, which appeal to patriotism and raise our national identity. Their elements originate from the Saka, Han mythology, from the ancient Turkic period, from the period of the Golden Horde, and then from the Kazakh Khanate. Myth is a complex concept. In general, any signs, omens, rituals, traditions include mythical elements that are reflected both in literature, culture and painting. Any ancient ritual such as unveiling the bride's face, beta shar, is also a mythical ritual. A bride is brought to a new house, hiding her face under a veil and putting saukele on a head. Look, the bride's face is not unveiled with hands, but with the kamshi, Kazakh whip, or the headband of a dombra neck. The kamshi was always one of the main symbols of power among nomads. Ancient healers used it as sacred instrument for healing and banishing the evil spirits. Unveiling the bride's face with the kamshi, people scared away evil, wishing a bright path to a new life. Any tradition or custom originate from mythology or from some ancient superstitions, as in the case with beta shar.
Алға ақжолтай болуына ақ тілегін арнап жатыр. Сонда қарасаңыз, кез келген салттың арғы тегі, түпкі тиегі мифпен, мифтік ұғымдармен, көне наным сеніммен байланысып жататыны осыдан ақ көруге болады.
Of the two most superstitious nations in the world, one is for sure the Kazakhs. Where do omens originate from?
Біздің қазақ халқы және де көшпелі мына бауырлас түркі халықтарымыз бәрі де өте ырым тиымды қатаң ұстанады.
Kazakhs, like all nomadic Turkic peoples, are very superstitious and strictly adhere to their beliefs. But all these signs known today appeared long before society created laws in their today's understanding. If now we live according to legislation that is written on paper and law enforcement agencies monitor its implementation, then in the old days, the life of our ancestors proceeded according to unwritten laws, signs that include superstitions and prohibitions, on which traditions and customs were based. They were a kind of laws or rules that the nomads were obliged to adhere to. For what? For protection from external forces and evil spirits. That is why the ancient people used these kind of rules of social relationships. For example, they said, while standing in the doorway, do not push the door frames in different directions, because they were considered two golden pillars of the dwelling. The right side was personified with support of the father, and the left meant the mother's support. Pushing them in different directions was considered a bad sign, since it was regarded as if you were pushing father and mother away from each other. After all, they are the base of any house. All the signs stem from some ancient beliefs that remained in the memory of people and helped them adapt to life in a social environment, or adapt to one or another natural condition. This is what the signs served for, being the defining tool for the survival of the people in ancient times. Some signs lose their relevance over time and are forgotten, but their traces may remain in our culture. There are signs adapted to modern life, but every sign has a meaning. For example, there are signs of a prohibitive nature. Do not pour milk. Do not cut the grass. Do not cross the road to the elder. Do not laugh at a disabled person. Such rules teach decency and virtue. Our ancestors established them at one time so that the future generation would not be wasteful, but would learn and strive for kindness and mercy. After all, these rules have an educational nature. Yes, these are its roots, which come from the precepts of our ancestors. Do not pour milk and do not cut the greens. It is clear why you cannot do that. But they also say, do not raise your feet to the sky. What is the meaning of this superstition? This superstition appeared in ancient Turkic mythology. For example, why can't you cut greens? The ancients believed that vegetation was the hair of Mother Earth. Therefore, cutting greens was like cutting hair from your mother's head. Earth is our mother. Therefore, the Kazakhs are so sensitive to it. Even now, when people talk about land, Kazakhs defend it. Why? Because they perceive it as a mother. Do not pick greens. Do not chop down trees. As for raising feet to the sky, it was believed that Almighty lives in heaven. You could not raise your feet, since this was considered an expression of disrespect. And if you do this, then the deity in heaven will send you punishment in return. Where does all this come from? This is from feelings of respect and love for their homeland and land.
Siz жақсы білетін, сіз тарихын, мазмұнын.
Do you have any favorite omens that you could gladly tell about?
Енді бұл өте күрделі дүние ғой. Көбі мысалы қалып баратқан сияқты.
This is a very difficult topic because now many omens and traditions are losing their relevance. More and more young people prefer to live in cities. They leave villages. Aksakals or the elders leave this world one after another. There is no one to transfer all the knowledge that they have kept. So we also lose many signs and traditions. For example, Kazakhs used to ask elders for a blessing before the start of the feast. So at this moment, a boiled lamb's head is brought on a platter. The question is, where it should be placed? Of course, in front of the Aksakal, the elder. Ahmet Baitosinov wrote, to make a bata, the head of a lamb must be given to the eldest, who gives his blessing. What's now? They don't even care whether Aksakal is sitting at the table or not and put the head of lamb in front of some young boss. There are even cases when a woman is served. But according to tradition, even if a person is an adult but his father is still alive, then he should never even touch this dish first at the table. The lamb's head should be served to someone who lost his father. The Kazakhs believed that if a person whose father is alive tries this dish first, then his father would die. Thus, all signs have their own principles. For example, if you hit the road on Friday, the road will be unsuccessful. There are even family signs which are adhered to by individual dynasties. I personally, as a person who researches traditional culture, cannot carelessly relate to the traditions and customs of the Kazakh people. For example, we were taught not to interrupt elders. If an elder speaks, then you need to wait until he finishes his speech. I have been taught this since childhood. Also, you can't look too closely into the eyes of an elder. When greeting at a meeting, it is enough to casually look in the face and then lower your gaze. You can't look Aksakals and respected people in the face for a long time. It's a kind of a little ritual when you meet. My father, when I was still a schoolboy, told me, "Your generation loses the traditions of the Kazakhs." I asked, why? I read Abay Kunanbayev, Mukhtar Awezov. We get a good upbringing at school. He said, "No, our etiquette is spoiling." I asked for examples, and he replied that I often look right in his face. That's what he said when I was a child. I asked if there was anything wrong with that. He said that he never looked his father directly in the eyes. It turns out that my father respected his father greatly.
Сонда ол кісі менің әкем өзінің әкесін қалай сыйлай алған?
Бұрын ата-әжелеріміз жағымызды таянсақ.
When we propped chin with hands or stood on the threshold, the elders told us that we must not do this, and we obeyed them without questions. Modern children argue, "Why? What will happen if I do not stop? Is there really some kind of danger from non-compliance?"
Қауіп бар. Жаңа баланың сұрап жатқаны өте дұрыс. Оларда адамның бала кезінде мифологиялық ойлау жүйесі ата-бабаның тамырына жақындау бір кезең болады. Неге деп көп сұрайтын сол.
Yes, of course, there is a danger. The fact that children ask us about this is natural. The child's way of thinking is very close to the mythological one that our ancestors thought. Therefore, children constantly ask, why and why? Our distant grandmothers and grandfathers explained the nature of the world around in different ways. They also interpreted the phenomena from the point of view of both religion and other beliefs. For example, my father explained why I shouldn't look into the eyes of elders, and this was kept in my mind. But unfortunately, now we lack those old people who can also explain the essence of the traditions. A child is wondering, and it is correct. For example, why do they say that you shouldn't prop your chin with your hand? Because this was typical of those people who had grief or misfortune, or whose psychological state was bad. This is done by a person who has suffered some kind of loss in his life, so he sits like that because he has depression. Therefore, they say not to incite trouble on yourself. Do not prop your chin with your hands. On the contrary, you have to be cheerful. This is what this superstition means. For example, the elders always stopped us when we clasp our hands behind our backs. In the capital, there is a monument to Abay, and there he stands with his hands behind the back. What a shame. In Kazakh traditions, holding hands like this is a very bad omen. Previously, the Kazakhs did not have prisons. People just tore off the headdress from the guilty, tied his hands behind backs, and branded him with shame. Therefore, when in childhood we were tied and clasped our hands behind our backs, the grandmothers always told us that this should not be done because this is the posture of a guilty person. Thus, repeating this posture is a very bad sign. But people do this because they don't know. In fact, you shouldn't prop your chin with your hands, keep your hands behind your back and hug your knees. Why can't one hug his knees? One shouldn't do this if he wants his path to be open, avoid depression, and be full of energy. Thanks to such prohibitions, our ancestors did not allow people to become depressed, lose heart, but be positive and look forward. For example, after the loss of children and unsuccessful attempts to have babies, Kenan Aziabayev, together with his wife, came to the house of Jambil Jabayev and took Jambil's linen with faith in the best. Kenan Aziabayev wrote about this. After this story, they had children. Doesn't this make a deep sense? Such superstitions helped and encouraged people in difficult moments of their lives. It gave strength. But all this should not be taken for blind, ignorant prejudices. We Kazakhs have always been an open nation. We know that there are antisocial nations and such peoples have had many suicides. If we were scared of something or suffered difficult times, we told our loved ones about it, and they helped, supported with advice or deed. We had an open society. Therefore, we did not even have suicides. In modern words, each village had its own psychologists, healers, clairvoyants who helped people deal with depression. Our society was spiritually healthy.
Қазіргі ұғыммен айтқанда, өзінің емшісі бар, жаңағы айттым ғой, балгері бар, бақсысы бар деп. Олар психологиялық тұрғыдан кісіні емдеп отырған ғой. Бір-бірінің көңілін емдеп отырған. Біздің қоғамымыз рухани сау болған сондықтан.
Сіз туралы әріптес достарыңыз пікір білдірген еді.
Your colleagues and friends willingly told us about you. Let's listen to them.
Тәуелсіздік алған 90-шы жылдардан бастап
After gaining independence, many Kazakhs who returned to their historical homeland began to contribute to our culture, science and art. One of these people is the poet and scientist Akedil Toishanuly. He was born and raised in Mongolia, and of course, he perfectly knows the Mongolian language. His works are largely based on ancient Turkic and Mongolian mythology. His scientific works are very popular in Turkic countries. Recently, his book Turkic-Mongolian mythology was translated and published in Turkey. Now this publication is popular. In general, no matter what business Akedil Toishanuly is engaged in, he works very scrupulously. Whatever he undertakes, he always researches the topic in detail and deeply.
Жалпы ғылымдағы ең үлкен еңбегі түрік-моңғол мифологиясы. Бұл еңбегімен
His greatest work is Turkic-Mongolian mythology. In this work, he explored two huge worlds in detail, Turkic and Mongolian mythologies. He connected both of these sources with new historical facts. Having systematized all this, he did an enormous scientific work.
ғылыми әлемге көрсеткен үлкен іргелі еңбек.
What place do blessings and wishes take in the culture of people that bring up their children on the principle, receive a blessing, not a curse?
Бұл да жаңағы жақсы сөз жарым ырыс дейді ғой. Яғни адамның болашағын баянды қылу, жарқын болдыру үшін осы арқылы сөзіміздің кодын пайдаланған.
They say a good word is half the wealth. In the old days, people actively used speech codes. They did this to program the interlocutor for a brighter future. They said kind words. If a person betrayed his people, his land and country, then he was given a curse. He was given teris bata. People cursed in exceptional cases. They put a guilty on a black donkey, covered his face with soot, tied him up and spat in his face. If the headdress was removed, then people twisted his arms and tied him to a yurt or to the wheel of a cart. It was like a prison. This meant that a person lost his honor and dignity in society. Therefore, they cursed people who betrayed their homeland, land, people, or were extremely disrespectful to their fathers. Such punishments were used to express people's contempt and drove the guilty out of the village. The witnesses of this humiliating procedure drew their own conclusions and learned their lessons. This is about curses. As for the blessing, this is a kind of tradition for the formation of great personalities, like hero Bawarjan Mamishali, like poets Abay Kunanbayev and Jambil Jabayev. This is the tradition of receiving blessings. Jambil Jabayev received a blessing from Suinbai, and Bawarjan Mamishali received bata from Jambil Jabayev before the war. And thanks to this, he became a hero and returned home unharmed. Also, cutting the fetters of a child, putting the baby in the cradle, or when we bring the bride into the house, we always give bata, a blessing filled with sacred meaning. blessing encourages us to strive for a bright future.
Ғибратты нақыл сөздерімізбен бата береміз. Бата арқылы көгеріп көктейміз. Сол арқылы болашағымыз баянды болып, арман мұратымыз асыл болуға біз ақ бата арқылы үндеп келе жатырмыз.